I didn't think of it as handing him over. That would have sounded too final, too careless. It was just a few days. Work had stacked up in a way I couldn't ignore, and they had offered, insisted, really, that he stay with them. You need rest. My mother-in-law had said the night before I left him there, he needs stability. It was phrased like concern, but I remember the way she lingered on that last word, stability. At the time, I let it pass. They had always disagreed with how I raised him, not loudly, not in ways you could easily argue against. Just small corrections, suggestions that weren't really suggestions. A different tone when they spoke to him, softer but firmer, as if they were gently undoing something. I told myself it was generational. The first day went quietly. A few photos, a short video of him eating dinner. He looked fine, comfortable. The second day, my calls went unanswered until late evening. When she finally picked up, her voice was distracted. He's sleeping, she said quickly. You shouldn't disturb him. I hadn't asked to. By the third day, I noticed something else. The messages were no longer updates. They were statements. He had eaten. He had played. He had slept. No questions about when I was returning. No sense that I was expected back at all. I told myself I was overthinking. On the fourth day, I came home. Their house looked the same. The same curtains, the same potted plants near the gate, the same faint hum of the television inside. Nothing had shifted outwardly. But when I knocked, no one opened the door. At first, I assumed they hadn't heard me. I knocked again, louder this time. I called out his name, then hers. There was movement inside. I could hear it clearly, footsteps, something being moved across the floor. Relief came too quickly. I stepped closer to the door. Amy, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's me. Silence followed, but not the empty kind. It was full of presence, of listening. Then her voice came through the wood, firm and unfamiliar. We are protecting him from you. For a second, the words didn't register. They hovered somewhere between sound and meaning. You will never see him again. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't emotional. It was stated the way someone might state a decision that had already been made. I stood there longer than I should have. There's a moment when your mind tries to correct reality. It searches for context, for a version of events that makes the sentence less final. I waited for her to open the door, to explain, to soften it. She didn't. Instead, I heard something quieter, a murmur, as if she was speaking to him, not to me. I realized then that whatever this was, it hadn't started today. I stepped back from the door. Not in panic, not in anger, just a small, deliberate step backward. There are arguments you can win by raising your voice, by forcing the other person into a corner. This wasn't one of them. I could already feel it. If I pushed, they would retreat further into whatever story they had built. So I turned around. I walked back to my car, sat inside, and closed the door without starting the engine. For a few minutes, I did nothing. Then I opened my phone. I didn't call them again. I didn't send messages asking for explanations. Instead, I started with something simple. I wrote down the last 4 days, times, missed calls, the exact words she had used through the door. It felt strange at first, reducing something so personal into something so structured. But as I kept writing, the confusion began to settle into something clearer. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a claim, and claims don't resolve themselves inside families when both sides believe they're right. I made a call, not to someone who knew me, to someone who didn't. The conversation was clinical. They asked for dates, for details, for any prior disagreements that might be relevant. I answered without embellishment. When I hung up, the situation felt colder, but also more defined. I stayed in the car until I saw the police vehicle arrive. It wasn't dramatic, no sirens, no urgency. Just a quiet stop outside the house I had just been locked out of. 2 officers stepped out. I approached them, explained briefly. They listened, nodding occasionally, their expressions neutral. Then one of them knocked on the same door I had. This time it opened, not immediately, but faster than before. I stood a few steps behind, close enough to hear, far enough to avoid turning it into something personal again. Her voice had changed, softer now, but tighter. We were only trying to help, she said. The officer's response was measured. He asked to see the child. He asked about consent, about guardianship, about why access had been denied. There was no argument in the way he spoke, just a steady narrowing of the situation into facts. For the first time, I heard hesitation from inside the house. It wasn't a collapse. It was smaller than that. A shift in tone. A pause before answering. They let the officers in. I stayed outside. It felt important not to follow immediately, not to turn this into a confrontation I might complicate. Whatever needed to be clarified would be clarified without me adding to it. Minutes passed, longer than I expected. When the door opened again, one of the officers stepped out and gestured for me to come forward. He's inside, he said simply. No apology, no explanation, just an acknowledgement. I walked in slowly. The house felt different now, not because anything had changed physically, but because whatever had been unspoken before was now visible in the air between us. He was sitting on the couch, holding a toy I didn't recognize. When he saw me, he didn't run. He just looked up, as if confirming something. I crossed the room and sat beside him. You ready to go home? I asked quietly. He nodded. There was no resistance when I stood up with him. No attempt to stop me. My mother-in-law stood near the doorway, her hands clasped together. She looked like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the version of it that would still hold. "We were worried," she said finally. "Her needs." The officer interrupted gently. "That's not for you to decide." It wasn't harsh. It didn't need to be. Something in the room settled after that. Not peacefully, but definitively. I didn't argue. I didn't respond. There wasn't anything left to say that would change what had already been revealed. We left. The drive home was quiet. He leaned against the window, watching the road in that distant way children do when they're processing something they can't quite explain. I didn't ask him questions. I didn't fill the silence. Some things need time before they can be spoken about without being shaped by someone else's version. When we reached home, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Everything was where I had left it. But it didn't feel the same. I set his bag down, helped him change, moved through the motions of returning to normal. It felt almost procedural, like I was reestablishing something that had been interrupted rather than broken. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat in the living room and looked at my phone. There were messages from them, missed calls, a few long texts that started with explanations and ended with something that resembled justification. I didn't open them, not because I didn't care, but because I understood now that whatever they believed hadn't disappeared. It had just been pushed back by something stronger. That didn't mean it was gone. I placed the phone face down and leaned back. There was no sense of victory, no relief that felt complete. I had him back. That was clear, tangible. But something else had shifted into the open. Something that couldn't be folded back into normal conversation or ignored during family gatherings. They hadn't just kept him from me, they had believed they had the right to. And now I knew that too. I turned off the lights and sat in the quiet for a while longer, aware that what had been restored today came with a different kind of weight, one that wouldn't announce itself loudly, but would remain just beneath the surface, waiting for the next moment it might matter again.